So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to speak to a young crowd who actually work in the ICU, who actually diagnose the condition, start the treatment. In the morning, when the boss comes, they just brief him that this is what I have done. And no subject is closer to me than ventilator associated pneumonia because while I was at AIMS for 3 decades, 2 decades I was conducting studies on web and following them up. I don't think we have made much headway. In fact, we have gone behind as far as hospital-acquired infections are concerned, and we are in deep trouble. Uh, and I am grateful to Deepak Govind, who is a very close friend, and I have a tremendous appreciation for him for conducting not only this kind of activity but so many things. He has been secretary of the college, he has been responsible for improving the pattern of examination, conducting the IDCCM, IFCCM without any glorification. So that's what I like about him, and I really think that he is the one who has brought critical care of this country to a very high level without making a show, without making a noise, without making absolutely selflessly. So I would like all of you to give him a big hand before I start. I hope he continues his zeal. So the subject assigned to me, does my patient really have VAP or hospital-acquired pneumonia? If yes, how do I manage? And I need from morning to evening to actually talk on this, but I'll try to finish in 25-26 minutes. And this is the expert gathering which was referred to, which I was assigned the job of framing guidelines for ICU infections. And this meeting was held almost 2 years back at AIMS, and this constellation has 8 presidents of ISCCM, including Dr. Deepak Govind, Dhruv Chaudhary, Kapil Surpe. He was the sitting president, and this is the document which came out. If you guys have not gone through this document, I think it's freely available, or I could send it to you. This is not only about pneumonia; it has all the facets of infections in the ICU. So I start my presentation with a case. A 56-year-old gentleman diagnosed COPD with OSAS. He had increased dyspnea. You can see classical case of COPD. He presented with respiratory failure because NIV failed, so he had to be intubated and put on ceftriaxone and azithromycin as per guidelines. But on third day he worsened and he developed fever, and the count was 18,300, and this was the X-ray. You can see that he has developed consolidation in the right lower zone, and a mini bulb was done to diagnose. The question is, does this patient have VAP? Obviously, he has a VAP. But it won't be as simple in every case. And there are so many conditions which masquerade VAP that we need to understand. And how we define hospital-acquired pneumonia as the pneumonia which occurs 48 hours or more after admission, and when the patient is intubated, then we call it VAP. It's as simple as that. But it's not that till 47 hours you will call it CAP and 49 hours. It's an arbitrary definition. We say, what is the meaning of it is that in VAP and HAP, the microorganisms are imbibed from the ICU or the hospital respectively. And the microorganisms are different, we will come to that. The impact of VAP is that it increases the duration of mechanical ventilation, ICU stay and hospital days also. And one of the studies that we conducted at AIMS, and when we plotted the Kaplan-Meier curve, the survival is also different. When 2 arms, one developed VAP and one did not develop VAP, the mortality was high. So, for the sake of completion, the incidence, this is the old data, 2002. In ventilated patient, it is 20.6 per thousand ventilator days as compared to zero point 0.9 in non-ventilated patient. And crude mortality in those days was 71%. So, if the patient has developed VAP, if not 70% today, it might be 50%, but it's not less than that. So, how do we diagnose it? The diagnosis of VAP is very simple. Clinical diagnosis, you should suspect it, and there should be 2 or more serial X-ray with new or progressive or persistent infiltrates, and any two, fever, leukopenia, leukocytosis, or if the patient is 70 years or older, altered mental status with no other recognized cause, no onset of purulent sputum, very vague criteria. And sensitivity may be higher, but specificity is very low. So many conditions would give rise to this. So, to circumvent that, the CPIS score, those who will be taking examination should remember this. It's no more used in clinical practice, where tracheal secretion, X-ray, temperature, TLC, pH ratio, and microbiology are used. And if the score is more than 6, there is a good correlation. Then again you will see the specificity is only 49 to 56%. And if the score is less than 6, and it's a good prediction to discontinue antibiotic therapy after 3 days. This was 2003. It has almost now given up. So the differential diagnosis of VAP should be understood. This is a patient right now admitted. You can't see this. The slide projection is not good. This patient has pneumothorax. This patient has collapse. This patient has fluid overload. You can see, and this patient has bilateral diffuse shadow, interstitial lung disease, and ARDS. So atelectasis, pleural effusion, pulmonary embolism, cardiogenic pulmonary edema, lung cancer, and pulmonary alveolar hemorrhage. These are the main causes that you have to think of before putting your hand on VAP. Because the moment you say it is VAP, you have to start on very expensive at times antibiotics, and you are looking at worse outcome. And more importantly, if you miss all these conditions, if you diagnose pulmonary alveolar hemorrhage, then it will be steroids. If it is atelectasis, you have to go, give physiotherapy and do bronchoscopy. And VAP has a different treatment that we are talking about. So how do I achieve microbiological diagnosis? Every time you want to know whether it's a Pseudomonas or Acinetobacter or MRSA or so, and should all patients be suspected VAP undergo a bronchoscopic sampling? If you ask a pulmonologist, which I am, to give an opinion on a patient of VAP, he'll quickly come to the ICU with his bronchoscope and put in a bronchoscope. She is saying yes. Are you a pulmonologist? No. But this is from our experience, she is saying yes. That is what it is. So I'll be addressing certain issues which will clarify some of the points in your practice, and if that is so, then my job is done. So the microbiological diagnosis can be done by tracheal aspirate or mini BAL or non-bronchoscopic BAL as it is called, and bronchoscopy. So achieving microbiological diagnosis is actually not easy, but logically it makes sense that you have a right lower lobe pneumonia, you have a bronchoscope, you are going through the, you are in the right lower lobe. So what can be better? You take a protected sample and you think that you have done a great job. Rightly so, but and this is a mini BAL which can be done with number 16 and 8 catheters and the trap. At that time when we did this study, it was costing 50 rupees. So what we did in a small study as a MD thesis, that we compared tracheal aspirate, mini BAL and bronchoscopy. That means in a patient who had VAP as a clinical diagnosis, we did all three and sent it for semi-quantitative culture. And since it is a government setup, we could do that. It is done free. Otherwise, you can't do that. So what we found that non-bronchoscopic BAL and bronchoscopic BAL were comparable. The sensitivity and specificity was similar, and we compared with the international literature. The results were same. In the Western world, a dedicated catheter is used for non-bronchoscopic valve, which has a biodegradable plug at the tip, so that you go into the lower respiratory tract and then open that plug with the flush of air or 5 ml saline, and you take absolutely protected specimen. It's too expensive for us, so we use 2 catheters, and so subsequently, there was a large study, multicentric trial and done in Canada and North America, where compared results of bronchoscopy and non-bronchoscopic collection of specimen. The conclusion of this large study was that the bronchoscopy does not lead to better outcome. So, in a garden variety of valve, do not call a pulmonologist. That's my recommendation. But it's not that the bronchoscope is useless. You may use the bronchoscope if your patient is not responding. If you are thinking that there is a collapse of the lung, which you must be opened up, or if there is suspicion of lung cancer, or if your patient is not responding in 48 to 72 hours and lung shadows are increasing, or you are suspecting a pulmonary alveolar hemorrhage where you must do a lavage for hemocidin-laden macrophages, then a bronchoscopy should be done. The next question that I am going to address is, should cultures be done routinely in all ventilated patients? So I guess all of you are working in the ICU. As you intubate the patient, do you send tracheal aspirate on the next day? Please raise your hand for me to be. Nobody does it. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rest of the people don't send it? Sorry? Or you are lazy to raise your hand? Okay. So I will address this issue. Should cultures be done routinely in ventilated patients? That was a question that was. So this was a study that we did. This study was presented at the chest. So what we were wanting to know is the dynamics of web. How does the web develop? The aim was to determine the organism causing various body sites colonization, to correlate colonization with nosocomial infection, to find out antibiotic resistance pattern of organisms causing colonization and infection, to correlate colonization with nosocomial pneumonia. So what we did is that as the patient was admitted, within 24 hours, we collected specimen from 6 sites. And those patients who were shifted from another hospital, they were not studied. So axillary swab, nasal swab, perineal swab, pharyngeal swab, or endotracheal aspirate, tips of the IV catheter and Ryle's tube, they were tested within 12 hours of admission, 48 hours, 5 days and weekly thereafter. So each patient underwent 36 or 40 samples. And our microbiologists were quite upset that you are making us do, and these were all tested with semi-quantitative cultures. And if the patient developed pneumonia, then we did a bronchoscopy. So this was the methodology, and what we found is, to our horror, by 5th day, almost all were positive. So by 5th to 7th day, the trachea, the stomach and the skin all got colonized with pathogenic organisms. And this is the Staphylococcus aureus. On the first culture, 44 were MRSA. By first week, 81 became MRSA. Meaning thereby, as the duration of ventilation increases, the chances of drug resistance increases. What was the result? The result was that these are the colonization. The blue one are airways and the reddish one or brown one are gastric, and this is the pneumonia. So majority of people did not develop pneumonia till then when we followed them up, and only 5 people developed pneumonia. So conclusion was that although the colonization very common, but colonization need not be treated because these patients do not usually develop pneumonia. What is the implication? Implication is that I go on the rounds and the registrar or senior resident tells me that I have started this patient on cephalosporin sulbactam and amikacin. So I asked him, does this patient have fever? He said, no. I said, does this patient have leukocytosis or X-rays abnormal? No, I have this culture. I have culture of Pseudomonas which is sensitive to cephalosporin sulbactam and amikacin. So I have started last night. And let me promise you, no intensivist would dare to stop it. Reason is that this patient dies 2 days later because of the critical illness. And then this file goes for scrutiny. Then they said, you stopped an appropriate antibiotic. There was a culture sensitivity. Because the people who will scrutinize will be a lawyer or a judge or whatever. There you will keep explaining. So it is better to understand when to start and not to treat colonization. So these are the approach to diagnosis. HAP and WAP can be clinically defined, should be clinical diagnosed. Send lower respiratory tract samples and blood culture prior to antibiotic if you are suspecting. If you have diagnosed WAP, then you send cultures and of course sputum analysis should be done. This is not related to, and although this recommendation says the Procal may be there, 0.5 may be there to distinguish infective or non-infective, but the current recommendation does not say that. So, for patients with suspected HAP and WAP, we suggest using clinical criteria alone rather than CPIS or CRP or PCT to decide whether or not to initiate antibiotic. This is the crux. This is the recommendation. So, coming to the treatment part. Anybody has any question? I can stop here because this is the second part. Anybody has any confusion about how to diagnose WAP, how to differential diagnose, whether to use bronchoscope? And in my ICU, wherever I work, I was at AIIMS and now at PSRI. I insist for using non-bronchoscopic valve because it doesn't cost time or the money. You just use 2 catheters of 16 and 8, cut the larger catheter by 1.5 inch, connect it to the mucus extractor, and you have done as good job as bronchoscopy. Although 2016 guidelines IDSA say the tracheal aspirate is good enough along with clinical parameters. So I hope you have understood the clinical part of it. Now coming to the treatment. Now this is little oldish paper. But 3 out of 7 studies said that if your antibiotics are inappropriate, then the mortality is high. So if your antibiotics are wrong or not appropriate, then you are increasing the mortality. So therefore, it is important to understand what is the correct antibiotics. So these are the guidelines. These are not Indian guidelines, these are the ATS, IDSA guidelines. Previously, up to 2016, the guidelines talked about early WAP and late WAP. Early WAP was supposed to be caused by simpler organisms like MSSA or Streptococcus pneumoniae or whatever, so that you could treat it with simpler antibiotics like ceftriaxone, furoxone and ertapenem. And late WAP means after 5 days, then you have to give anti-pseudomonal antibiotics and cover for MRSA. But 2016 guidelines dumped it. And the fact of the matter is we dumped it 15 years back because in our ICU we never had simpler microorganisms. So therefore, it switched whether there are risk factors for MDR or there are no risk factors for MDR. So risk factors for MDR are prior IV drug use within 90 days, septic shock at the time of WAP, ARDS preceding WAP, 5 or more days of hospitalization prior to the occurrence of WAP, and acute renal replacement therapy prior to WAP onset. So I don't think any of your patients in the ICU does not have these risk factors. So therefore, I hardly use this arm of WAP. That is ceftriaxone, fluoroquinolone or ertapenem. However, if you have these risk factors, you have to give one anti-pseudomonal beta-lactam antibiotic add one anti-pseudomonal fluoroquinolone or aminoglycoside or estrogen and add linezolid, vancomycin or teicoplanin. Now these are just guidelines. Like where I worked in AIMS ICU and now wherever I work, at AIMS almost I never grew MRSA in my ICU. So therefore, in a routine patient I had never used linezolid or vancomycin or teicoplanin. In Indian setting, the Indian guidelines say do not use linezolid. Although linezolid has very good penetration in the lung, but we are reserving linezolid for treatment of XDR tuberculosis. Teicoplanin is not here because it's not approved by FDA approved and these guidelines are written in United States. But teicoplanin is as good antibiotic as vancomycin and doesn't require MIC level and TRUP levels. So avoid aminoglycoside if alternative available, that is quinolone. And quinolones are also for pneumonia we try not to use in community setting. But I don't refrain from using it in the ICU setting as long as I ruled out tuberculosis. Other thing is that pattern of sensitivity in your own ICU should be known. Now this is AIMS ICU where Pseudomonas aeruginosa in 2001 meropenem has 80% sensitivity. 2011 our data showed 0% sensitivity. So this becomes a useless antibiotic. And this is not unusual in other daily ICU also. Whenever you have an open ICU where your gastroenterologist, colleague, cardiologist or nephrologist and so many other specialists come, they know only one antibiotic, that is meropenem. They'll come and say meropenem start. With the result, I am not criticizing anybody, but actually this is what happens. Now if I know that in my ICU the meropenem sensitivity is less than 10% of whatever bug we are talking about, then I have no business to use it. And that is, at All India Institute, we must have abused meropenem in 2001 for us to develop this 0% sensitivity. So therefore, the message is that your own microbiology in your ICU or in the hospital should be known. So coming to the guidelines, what are the common organisms which cause VAP and what are the risk factors for infection with MDR pathogen? We know common organisms are Acinetobacter, Klebsiella and Pseudomonas. In India, GNBs are most common and mostly are drug resistant. And risk factors for MDR pathogens I already said. So what should be the initial microbiologic antibiotics in this case? These are the guidelines. Among patients with VAP who are not at high risk of MDR pathogen are in the ICU with high prevalence of resistant organism, that is 15%, and low prevalence of MRSA, 2 agents active against gram-negative organism including Pseudomonas is recommended. These are the recommendation, Indian guideline recommendation that are there. Regimen for MRSA is vancomycin, I need not go into the doses, linezolid, IV teicoplanin, and therapy should be for 7 days. And that regimen for Pseudomonas, I need not read all these antibiotics. So whenever you have grown Pseudomonas, you have to use 2 anti-Pseudomonal drugs. One should be piperacillin-tazobactam or cefepime or ceftazidime or meropenem or estrogen plus ciprofloxacin or amikacin or gentamicin, topramycin, so on and so forth. Now the issue comes, and I am sure you all, those who are in Delhi at least, the moment the VAP occurs, the consultant says start cholesterol. And I want to review my data of last 1 year, whether I have saved any patient by starting cholesterol. I do not know. I really don't know. But this is what is happening. So, role of cholesterol in empiric therapy is cholesterol is not recommended for routine use as empirical agent in VAP. However, it may be used upfront in ICUs if there is a high prevalence of carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae to the tune of more than 20%. It's not evidence-based, it is UPP. That means useful clinical practice. And those of you who are working in Delhi would know that in your ICUs, it is not only 20%, it touches 80% or 90%. So, there is a wisdom in using colistin. So, and what should be the duration of treatment? And in my practice, I saw at the AIIMS also that once the antibiotics started, they are never stopped till the time patient gets discharged. Be it neurosurgery or we don't look at our antibiotics every day. So I'm not criticizing anything, but I want to put across certain points. The duration of therapy, short duration of 7 to 8 days of antibiotic therapy should be used in case of VAP with good clinical response. This is 1A. 1A means high quality evidence and strong recommendation by the group. So please, if the patient have no fever, his ventilatory parameters are good, the counts are coming down, and the lung shadows are getting better, you please don't give antibiotics. This is absolutely evidence based. However, the longer duration, that is 14 days of antibiotic therapy, should be considered in case of VAP caused by NFGNBs or is associated with severe immune deficiency, structural lung disease like COPD, bronchiectasis, ILD, empyema, lung abscess, necrotizing pneumonia, and inappropriate initial antibiotic. 3A, that means evidence is extremely poor. But there was a strong recommendation by the group that the longer antibiotic. What about de-escalation of antibiotic? The de-escalation means you reduce from broad spectrum to narrow spectrum, combination therapy, monotherapy, or you want to stop the drugs. Why you should de-escalate? Because it leads to decrease antimicrobial resistance, decrease side effect, and also reduces the cost. The question of what is the role of procalcitonin? So here, if I stop and ask you, how many of you are using procalcitonin in your ICU? Please raise your hand for me to be. My God. So almost everybody, almost majority of you are using procalcitonin. So the Indian guidelines said, the question was, can serum procalcitonin be used for de-escalation of antibiotics? The clinical response with or without serum procalcitonin should be used to guide the de-escalation of antibiotics in VAP when the anticipated duration of therapy is 7 to 8 days. 1B. Evidence is there. The majority of people were against it. The experts who sat down that procalcitonin should not be used with the duration of antibiotics. However, serum procal levels together with clinical response should be used in specific conditions like severe immunocompromised patients, drug-resistant pathogens, initial inappropriate therapy or de-escalation of antibiotics. This is 3A. Evidence is not there. So, but the recommendation was strong. So, use procalcitonin the way you are using. The literature is, is not very clear about it. We actually sat down during Criticon. 16 experts sat down and have framed guideline on use of procalcitonin, which should be coming in 3 to 4 months. I don't think it will make you wiser, but this is where we are. A word about aerosolized antibiotics. The colistin and terbinafine nebulization may be used as adjunct to intravenous therapy. What is important is that it should never be used as monotherapy. So if you want to use colistin as a aerosolized therapy, you must give intravenously. The advantage is that antimicrobial agent quickly reach the infected site, bind to the target site, lesser systemic side effects. Determining factors, the particle size should be 1 to 3 micron, and delivery system, mesh nebulization is the best. The usual nebulization would not give you much benefit. The cons are the limited data are there. There is high deposition in trachea. There may be mucus plugging, secretion, bronchospasm, ventilator asynchrony. All this would hinder the deposition of antibiotic, and there is mismatch between clinical and microbiological improvement. But there is some evidence, as this critical care review, the nebulized antibiotic for VAP, a systematic review, and for VAP, due to gram-negative, there are susceptible only to aminoglycoside polymyxin. We suggest both inhaled and systemic antibiotic rather than systemic antibiotic should be used alone. Weak recommendation, very low quality evidence. Neither the evidence is there, but we all use it because you are dealing with a human life. whatever you think can benefit the patient, you want to give. Then I always say, lack of evidence is not evidence to contrary. So many things in intensive care we do because logically we think that it might work. So finally, a word about prevention. Although this is not the topic that it's not part of the topic that I have, but I thought I must talk about it. And web bundle, hand hygiene, glove, irrigation. You of course all know it. And the system that I work, every time I go to the bed, especially in ward, I have to beg for hand rub. And the sisters, they are scared of me and they rush and get, this hand hygiene practice is actually has not taken up. Or maybe I'm not criticizing anybody. Some hospital may be following it well, some are not following it well. AIMS had 38 ICUs when I left AIMS. The infection rates were exceedingly high, except in cardiothoracic surgery, where I used to visit frequently, and only way I could enter was to change completely into sterile gown and change slippers. There were no shoe covers, and it took me 10 minutes to get dressed for the ICU, and I had to use cap and mask. And I must give credit to the CTVS surgeons that they maintain a strict hygiene and visiting time and all those things. Otherwise, once the ICU infection sets in, the mortality goes up. So all this should be followed. Semi-recumbent position, stress ulcer prophylaxis, DVT prophylaxis, adjustment of sedation, daily assessment, extubation. And it's doable. And there was a study, and during the international conference that I attend, always there is a ICU which is very awarded a certificate, applauded for having zero web for 1 year. Zero web for 1 year. Now, if you want to enter the ICU in the Western world, you can't wear a wristwatch, you can't wear a necktie, you can't wear a full sleeve shirt, you can't use your stethoscope, you can't use mobile. And if the sister in charge feels that, then you can't touch a patient without cleaning your hands. And if the sisters feel that you can't, you have not done all this, she has a right to forbid you from entering the ICU. She can say, no, you can't go unless you do that. So the sister in charge is rewarded. Finally, subglottic suction drainage and outcome. This is one study that we conducted at AIMS 5 years back as a DM thesis. And this is a meta-analysis which shows the subglottic suction can prevent web. Finally, a word about antibiotic rotation or cycling. This concept has been given up though, but I still follow. I at least try to follow. As I said, I work in an open ICU. It's possible that when I used to go to the neurosurgery ICU, I saw 7 out of 8 patients in that ICU receiving meropenem. Because the senior resident, who are the most powerful people in All India Institute of Medical Sciences, he felt that meropenem is the best drug. And there is an evidence in the literature that if you rotate the class of antibiotic, and this is the evidence which is pretty old, if you keep rotating the class of antibiotic, then your generation of resistance become low. So I will just explain to you, when I was a student, the drug of choice for urinary tract infection was blanket nitrofurantoin. When I became senior resident and young faculty, the drug of choice was cotrimoxazole. Subsequently, the drug of choice became fluoroquinolones. Today, if you have a difficult urinary tract infection, you are again using your nitrofurantoin. What I am trying to tell you, the drug which is not used in the ICU, it becomes a good drug. The organism becomes sensitive. So the message is not to use same class of drugs in your ICU. Keep rotating it, keep using your wisdom. This, what it said that you stop using particular class of antibiotic in ICU, which is impractical. You can't do that in the ICU. Finally, this is the last slide, and this is a little philosophical from IDS ATS guidelines. It is important to realize that guidelines cannot always account for individual variation among patients. They are not intended to supplant physician judgment with respect to particular patient or special clinical situation. So thank you very much for, if there are any questions I would like to ask. And these are the people who work with me at AIMS. I always acknowledge them because without that the studies couldn't have been done. Sorry.
Thank you, sir. It's always a privilege to hear from you.